All right, everyone, good morning. It is 10:05 on Tuesday, June 24th. Welcome to the San Francisco Office of Labor Standards Enforcement's Paid Parental Leave Ordinance webinar. My name is Bianca Polavina. I am a compliance officer here at the Office of Labor Standards Enforcement. I will be your main presenter. I'm joined by two other colleagues here at the office, Maura Prendeville and Bernice Casey. For those of you who are just joining us now, this is pretty much our Paid Parental Leave Ordinance 101 webinar with some specific examples. So a couple of things just to keep in mind. This is the first time that we have ever done a Paid Parental Leave Ordinance webinar. So we ask for your patience and also your feedback. I'm sure we will get this question many, many times today. We will make all materials available, including the slide deck and whatever else we can provide, posted to our website by early next week. We are not going to be distributing the slides in this webinar. We are expecting several hundred people, and so there is no chat feature to this webinar. Instead, there's a question and answer feature. Maura and Bernice are going to take turns as best they can throughout this webinar to address your questions. We will do our best to have dedicated live question and answer time at the end of the webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. Here is something that hopefully all of you have received a reminder email from me. If you registered after this past Friday, you might not have gotten it, but as a threshold reminder, this law, the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance, does not apply to any employees who are working at the San Francisco International Airport. This law also does not apply to any government employer. What that means is the city and county of San Francisco, school districts, utility districts, the University of California, San Francisco State University, and the federal government do not have to comply with a paid parental leave ordinance. So if these bullet points apply to you, you are probably not going to get a whole lot out of this webinar. So once again, just making sure if you've got people that are working at the airport, and if you are here representing a government employer, this webinar is probably not for you. So let's get started with talking specifically about what the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance is. As many of you know, there is no federal paid family leave program. Unfortunately, the United States is at the bottom of the world rankings for this. However, California is a leader, and San Francisco is also a leader. In California, we have the Paid Family Leave Program. And here in San Francisco, we have a special San Francisco law that basically piggybacks on the state law. So before we talk about some of the more technical terms, I just want to take the opportunity to explain more broadly that this is all about wage replacement so that new parents can bond with their children and not worry about the loss of income. This law is also specifically designed to maximize the benefit for low to mid-wage earners. It may not necessarily help the high wage earners in the same way, but that's the overall goal of the state paid family leave program. And our San Francisco law basically is a piggyback or an accompaniment to the state paid family leave program. So now for all the legal stuff, all the technical jargon terms. What is the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance? The PPLO, as we'll refer to it throughout this webinar, requires covered employers to pay supplemental compensation to covered employees who receive California paid family leave for child bonding purposes. The PPLO is also intended to help those covered employees take all 8 weeks of California paid family leave for child bonding without worrying about loss of income. In the next several slides, we're going to break down a lot of those terms more specifically so that you know what is going on. So we're going to talk very briefly about who is a covered employer and what a covered employer must do. So first of all, you need to figure out if you are representing an employer here or assisting an employee who's trying to figure out if they might be entitled to this benefit. Who does this law apply to? This law applies to any private sector employer who has at least 20 or more employees. And once again, government entities are not covered employers. This applies only to for-profit entities, private sector employers. We also have some information here if you're sort of right on that margin of sometimes we have 21 employees, sometimes we have 18, sometimes we have 19. We're going to talk about this concept a lot shortly. But if your number is right around 20 and it fluctuates, we're going to direct you to average your employee count over the PPLO look-back period. And we'll talk more in detail about the PPLO look-back period shortly. Hopefully by now you've determined whether or not you are a covered employer, and hopefully you are one. Otherwise, I don't really think the next hour or so of your time will be best spent here. That said, what does a covered employer have to do under this law? A covered employer has to post and distribute the PPLO poster. We're going to show you that poster, and it's available on our website. A covered employer must provide the PPLO form to any San Francisco employee expecting to become a parent. And a covered employer must calculate and pay the supplemental compensation on time and in full. And once again, the poster, the form, calculation instructions, and so much more are all available on our office's website at sf.gov/PPLO. Let's talk about who is a covered employee. That person must work in the geographic boundaries of San Francisco. That employee needs to have worked for a covered employer for at least 180 days before the leave period begins. The next 2 points talk about pretty much what is considered regular work in San Francisco. It's 2 different things that have to be fulfilled. One, they have to work at least 8 hours per week in the geographic boundaries of San Francisco for a covered employer, and in cases where the employee splits their time, works part-time in San Francisco, part-time elsewhere, at least 40% of their total weekly hours need to be spent working in San Francisco. That employee also has to apply for and be eligible to receive California paid family leave benefits from the EDD. One thing we really want to emphasize to all of you is this employee does not actually have to be covered by other state or federal leave laws, known by their acronyms as CIFRA and the FMLA, to receive the PPLO benefit. There are wage replacement benefits, that's California paid family leave and the San Francisco PPLO, and then there are the job protected leave laws, California Family Rights Act and the FMLA. It's your job as the employer to be able to analyze and assess each of these laws separately. We promised that we would talk a little bit in greater detail about what is the PPLO look-back period, and so this is where we're going to do it. Whenever there's a question about whether or not an employer might be covered, whether or not an employee might be covered, what to do if there are some unique situations, and you call our office, overwhelmingly, we're going to ask you questions to help figure out what is the look-back period. The way the law defines it is it depends on your pay period structure. We're pretty much looking at the pay periods before the first day of the employee's leave. So if you do it monthly, it's the 3 monthly pay periods. If you do things semi-monthly or bi-weekly, that is 6 of those pay periods. Or if you do things weekly, it's 12 weekly pay periods. And this is how we use the look back period. This is present in what we call our rules interpreting the ordinance. We use the look back period to determine first whether the employer is covered. When the number of employees fluctuates, we need to look at the look back period to see whether or not the employer is going to be covered. Next, so that should be a 2, not a 1, but next we look at it to determine if an employee is covered when the work location changes. So this is when somebody is potentially working in San Francisco, also in Oakland, Berkeley, other parts of the Bay Area. If work location changes, you can look at the look back period. We also use the look back period to determine if an employee is covered when their hours fluctuate, when basically they're not working a set number of hours every week. And then most importantly, we use the look back period to calculate the average normal weekly wage when those wages fluctuate. So anytime you have any kind of change, any kind of fluctuation from either the employer or the employee, we are going to need to look together at that look back period. And when in doubt, or if you're not certain, or you just want to run something past us, reach out to us, give us a call, send us an email about whether the employer and or the employee are covered by the PPLO. So next, we're going to talk about the to-do list for both the employer and the employee. And just as another reminder, these documents are posted on our website, sf.gov/PPLO. They're posted in English and Spanish and Chinese. The most important thing that you can do as the employer is number 1, to post the poster, and number 2, to provide that PPLO form to any San Francisco employee who tells you they will be or have recently become a parent. A lot of the webinar is going to talk about number 3 and number 4 on this list, but to be very clear with all of you, 95% of your problems as an employer can be prevented if you are doing number 1 and number 2 appropriately. If you as employers are educating your employees on their rights, which this law requires you to do, and make sure that you're providing the PPLO form and documenting when and how you do this, and you're able to say, this is where everything's posted in our work site, this is where everything is posted in our employee handbook, you are going to save yourself so much potential headache and stress. Your to-do list also includes determining the employee's eligibility and then calculating and paying whatever supplemental compensation is due to the employee. But again, just to be very, very clear, this entire chain starts with the employer satisfying its noticing requirements under this law, meaning you've got the poster up and you have your whole staff trained in San Francisco. As soon as you know that people are going to be taking paid family leave or might be taking paid family leave, that you are providing this PPLO form to those workers. The employee also has a to-do list. And again, this information is provided on our website. It's up to the employee to actually apply for California paid family leave. That is their responsibility. They also need to complete the San Francisco Paid Parental Leave form that you provide them and give it back to you, not to this office, because the supplemental compensation that's being paid is coming from you, from the employer. So you give them the form, they know they need to apply for paid family leave, they give the San Francisco Paid Parental Leave form back to you. They also need to, and we highly encourage them, to give them, or give you rather, the notice of computation, which is a document that the EDD provides. It's the EDD's calculation of what the state is going to pay the employee. We encourage the employees to attach that with their San Francisco paid parental leave form and go ahead and give that back to you. The employee should also maintain records and receipts that they get from the EDD. You might wind up both actually needing that documentation going forward. So again, for those of you who maybe joined us a little late, we are about a third of the way through our presentation. We are taking all questions through the question and answer box. Maura and Bernice, my colleagues, are handling those questions, and we'll have time for live questions later on in this webinar. We will be providing all of the materials that we can from this webinar on our website by early next week. Much of this information is already on our website. So moving forward, we're going to switch gears a little bit. And what we're going to talk to you a little bit about right now is the paid family leave program. So earlier in this webinar, what we talked about was how the San Francisco benefit of supplemental compensation is pretty much piggybacking or an accompaniment to the paid family leave benefit. So what is paid family leave? Paid family leave is a partial wage replacement benefit. It is an employee-funded benefit. All of us who are employees in the state of California contribute to this fund. We all have deductions from our paychecks going into this pot of money. And here, when we're talking about paid family leave, we're specifically talking about the 8 weeks of partial wage replacement to employees who are bonding with a new child. This can be a child from birth, adoption, or foster placement, and it applies to anybody who is becoming a parent. Here in 2025, the benefit for paid family leave, depending on income, is 70 to 90% up to a cap. If there are two parents, both of them can take the leave at the same time or at different times. This leave can also be taken consecutively or intermittently. The one rule about this benefit for partial wage replacement to bond with a new child is that all of the 8 weeks must be taken within 1 year of the child's birth, adoption, or foster placement. A caveat here for all of you is that although we can provide you with some information, we are not ultimately the agency that is in charge of making paid family leave determinations. And we do have to send you to the state, to the EDD. The phone number here is 855-342-3645. We can give you a little additional information about a change in state law, actually 2 changes in state law that went into effect earlier this year in 2025. The name of the law is SB 951, and there are 2 major changes here, which you see with the 2 bullet points. First, for disability and paid family leave claims, the percentage has increased in what the state will pay out. Now, the state will pay out up to 90% of wage replacement for workers who earn less than $63,000 per year, and up to 70% for higher income workers, up to a cap. In 2025, that cap is $1,681 per week. So this is largely good news for everybody. Now the state of California is providing more of that wage replacement, and what employers will have to spend on their share of supplemental compensation generally is decreased now. The second major update in paid family leave has to do with a vacation spend down. And again, we're not the experts here. We're simply relaying the information that we can, since this is about a state law. Employees are no longer required to use up to 2 weeks of their vacation time before they can start receiving paid family leave benefits. there is an interesting way that this intersects with our San Francisco law, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So those are the main updates for paid family leave. Again, if you have specific questions on this, we would ask that you talk specifically to the state of California. So moving forward, now we're going to talk a little bit about calculations and what the employer needs. So there are three main things that you're going to need, and you're going to get all these three things because you're going to have excellent practices that make sure that you are educating employees on their rights and that you are timely providing them with the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance form available on our website so that you can go ahead and get all the information you need. So number one, you need the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance form. You give them that form. You give each employee who has become or is about to become a parent who works in San Francisco that form. That form is available on our website in English, Spanish, and Chinese. Next, the second thing that you need is the weekly rates. That's basically what is the EDD's weekly wage replacement rate. And again, that wage replacement rate is now going to be 70 to 90% of the average weekly wage up to a cap. Next, to figure out the difference, what supplemental compensation you might need to pay, the third thing you'll need is you need the gross weekly wage. You can get this from the PPLO form. We also have a calculator on the website, but again, I just want to stress you should already have this information because you actually get this from your own payroll records. So the three things you need: a completed PPLO form, one, the EDD weekly rate, two, and the gross weekly wage, three. So this is a combination of documents from the employer, from the employee, and the state of California. If you do your job as the employer and timely provide the PPL form to the employee, and the employee does their job, completes that form, gets it back to you with their notice of computation, you should have everything you need to complete those calculations and pay out the worker. So let's actually talk about doing the math. We have two different scenarios for you here. One, we have a median wage earner, and then two, we have a maximum earner. So by having the EDD weekly amount and knowing the gross weekly wage, you can calculate what you need to pay in supplemental compensation. So let's say that the employee generally earns about $1,000 per week in wages. That's about $52,000 a year. That's their gross weekly wage. They give you a notice of computation that says the EDD is paying me $900 a week. That's a 90% wage replacement rate from the EDD. So you do your math. Okay, this person normally earns $1,000 a week. EDD payments are at $900 a week. The difference is $100 a week. That $100 a week is coming from you, the employer. $100 per week for up to 8 weeks. Your total obligation to this employee for the entire 8 weeks is simply $800. $100 times 8. That is supplemental compensation coming from you, the employer, to the employee. And it's great. The employee is basically made whole. They can enjoy the entire 8 weeks with their new child. That's for a median wage earner. Now we're going to talk about a maximum earner. So again, we have a cap. The cap is something that the EDD sets. And then with our law, remember our law, our San Francisco benefit is a piggyback to the state. So these two things are tied together. The EDD has determined that the weekly cap for calendar year 2025 is $1,681 a week. So when I say maximum earner, this is somebody who is earning a pretty decent amount of money, maybe not necessarily for the San Francisco Bay Area, which does have considerably higher wages than most of the rest of the United States. But our cap in 2025 for the gross weekly wage is $2,402 per week. That's just math. It's what we get from the EDD by using that 70% number that we talked about earlier. So this is about somebody who makes $125,000 a year or more. So the EDD is going to pay that person a maximum of $1,681 per week. Our cap in San Francisco is for 2025, $2,402 per week. And again, you're just doing math. You're subtracting the EDD amount from the gross weekly wage to figure out what you, as the employer, owe that person. And we have done that math for you. It is $721 a week. Again, this is for a maximum earner. And again, doing more math altogether, $721 per week times 8, which is the maximum number of paid family leave weeks available. That amount is $5,768. That's what it looks like for a maximum earner. And remember, these calculations will be different for everybody. So take the time to do it. It can be as simple as what we've done here. And for more complicated cases where fluctuations are at issue or multiple employers, we have resources for that on our website. We have a calculator that our analyst team has worked really hard on, updating each and every year, and we have had that available on our website for many years now, updated annually. So let's go ahead and talk about when to actually pay the supplemental compensation. So if the employee got everything timely from the employer, meaning you did your job as the employer, you provided them the PPLO form right away, they knew about this benefit, they were able to get you everything that you needed from the state, then it's up to you as the employer to make supplemental compensation payments at the next regularly scheduled pay period. So the thought on this is basically to make sure, again, that the employee can use and enjoy that 8 weeks of paid family leave without worrying about the loss of income up to the cap. So it is something that you can even front load it if you want to and pay it all in one go right at the start and be done with it, or you can divide it up into the pay periods depending on your scheme. One thing we just really want to stress is that the absolute deadline, and when we say deadline, we are very serious. This means you will start to be liable as the employer for interest and penalties, which can look like either up to $50 per day or even a triple penalty. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Your absolute deadline is 30 days after the paid family leave period has ended and that person is back at work. That is not where you want to be as an employer. You want to make sure that you don't even get close to that 30-day deadline, because that's generally when our office tends to get involved and it is not a positive outcome for anybody. So we are encouraging all of you to implement whatever you need on your side to pay the supplemental compensation while the person is actually on leave. So what we're going to talk about now is some common compliance issues and actually give you a series of scenarios that we're going to work through. So these are some of the anecdotal common compliance issues that we've seen over many years of working on this law since it went into effect in 2017. So the number one pitfall that has led to a lot of problems, so we don't want you to have a lot of problems, is a failure to notify employees about their rights. As soon as someone at the employer becomes aware that an employee is going to become a parent, again, via birth, adoption, or foster placement, give them that PPLO form and document how and when you did it. I will just give an anecdotal example of an investigation that I did where initially I did not get that documentation from the employer, and I did a whole bunch of calculations. The employer, after some delay, was able to show screenshots of their internal HR system where they were able to document the date and time of telephone conversations talking to the employee about the paid parental leave ordinance, and then documenting the emails and the actual US mail that they had sent the PPLO form to those employees. So that was great. The employer did the work and they were able to provide that in the course of the investigation. So that was really helpful. That's not always the case. We want you to make sure that you understand how important notifying the employees is about their rights. Some common misconceptions. Again, it sounds very strange to be saying this in 2025, but some people still think that paid family leave and PPLO compensation are only for birth mothers. This is false. It is called parental leave, both with the state and with the city. These wage replacement programs are for all parents, whether they are birth, adoptive, or foster parents. We have also witnessed a common misconception about an employee has to take all 8 weeks at once. This is not true. Intermittent paid family leave is available, and it is up to the employee to determine how they will take that leave. The employee is the best source of information about the caregiving schedule and the bonding schedule. Another common misconception is, well, the employee hasn't worked here that long. They haven't worked 180 days or a year or whatever it is, so we don't need to notify them of their rights. All of your San Francisco employees must always be notified of their rights under the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance, regardless of whether or not they are covered. Yet, please keep in mind that failure to notify is a standalone violation of the PPLO, and it is the root of almost all problems with compliance. So it is way, way better to be overly inclusive and overly eager to notify everybody. In fact, you should just put it in your employee handbook as soon as you get off this call, if it's not already there, and blast your entire San Francisco workforce and let them know it's in the employee handbook. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do some different scenarios together and try to walk through some of what you might see or some things that are kind of fun. So the first scenario has to do with giving birth in 1 year, but then taking bonding leave in a different year. So here we have our employee who gave birth in 2024. This employee took disability for their pregnancy prior to giving birth, got through disability, came back to work, and now wants to take their paid family leave in 2025. So the first question is this permitted? The answer is a very simple yes. EE stands for employee. It's a common abbreviation that we'll use for sake of space. Any employee can go on paid family leave within 1 year of the pregnancy, or sorry, the birth, adoption, or foster placement. So they can space it out. Now that you know that this is permitted, the next question is, okay, well, what is the appropriate claim date? What is the cap? Something happened in 2024. Now this other thing is happening in 2025. What's going on? Because these numbers fluctuate, right? Every year, the cap is different, the wages are different, basically what's going on. So the original claim date is going to follow this employee, and that actually comes from state law. If the employee applied for disability in 2024, it's all considered one event for our birth parents, right? They applied in 2024, the 2024 dates are going to control, and the 2024 cap will apply, not the 2025 cap. So if you have specific questions on this, we do still get them periodically. You can use the Q&A feature to ask, or you can reach out to us afterwards. So the takeaway from this is even if the employee gives birth in 1 year, they can take their bonding leave in the next year so long as they do all of that within 1 year of giving birth, and it is the original claim date for disability for pregnancy that's going to follow that employee for all the fun events that have to do with that child. Our next scenario has to do with multiple employers. So we have good old hardworking employee A. Employee A works for employer X 16 hours per week in San Francisco and also works for employer Y over in Oakland across the Bay Bridge 32 hours a week. So the question is, does employer X, the San Francisco employer, have to pay employee A supplemental compensation? This was inspired by a recent question that we received. The answer is yes. Employee A is regularly working in San Francisco for employer X. Employee A is working 16 hours a week for employer X and is working 100% of their time for employer X in San Francisco. So, assuming all the other conditions are met, employee A is regularly working in San Francisco for employer X. Okay, employer X has got it. They understand. Now, employer X is trying to figure out, okay, well, what wages are we responsible to replace? Because they've got this job here and then they've got this other job over there. It's always best to be as disciplined and detailed as possible. Employer X is responsible for only the wages that employer X pays. Employer X has no responsibility to do anything about employer Y. Each employer has their own responsibilities. You just need to stay in your lane and focus on what your particular responsibilities are. Further, employee A doesn't work in San Francisco for employer Y. So wages for time spent outside San Francisco is not going to be replaced under the San Francisco Paid Parental Leave Ordinance. So again, the takeaway here is in the event of multiple employers, each employer is going to be responsible for assessing whether or not they're covered, whether or not the employee is covered with them, and then what supplemental compensation, if any, they owe. So when you do have folks who have multiple employers, there's a whole segment on the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance form that talks about multiple employers. If you need more assistance on this, it does happen periodically. Go ahead and give us a call or send us an email. The next scenario we want to talk about is something that we are seeing a little bit more of, and it has to do with an internal leave policy. So good old employer Z has its own parental leave policy. We do our own thing. Do we have to do anything about this San Francisco paid parental leave law? Very quickly, yes, employer Z still has to comply with the PPLO. Employer Z needs to update its employee handbook and discuss exactly what its parental leave policy is and how it interacts with or not the PPLO. Basically, this law, the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance, does say that an employer pretty much can take credit for whatever it spends on its own policy, through its own policy. Remember that this law was written assuming that an employer does absolutely nothing. If the employer is doing something, the employer has the extra special burden to explain what it does and how what it does either meets or exceeds what the PPLO requires. The employer still needs to post the poster. That is still always going to be a requirement for any law, basically, like any state, federal, city law. You've got to put up the posters, and in some cases, may still need to provide the PPLO form to employees. To be as safe as possible, hopefully, you're treating all your employees the same. But let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, money. Does employer Z actually still have to pay extra money in supplemental compensation to the covered employees? And I must give you the most lawyerly answer ever, which is it depends. And this is where you really want to get into the business, the details. Who does employer Z's policy apply to, and how much does that policy pay out? Pretty much, if you are treating all parents the same, or even better than what our local law requires, you have an internal leave policy, all birth, adoptive, and foster parents are going to be given 12 weeks off. No questions asked. They don't even have to take paid family leave under the state. You probably have met all your obligations. But what you actually need to do is you need to explain that in a way that employees can understand and have that in your handbook. You still have to put up the poster, and you need to be very, very clear to your employees about what you're doing. This law is not trying to get anybody to double dip. Remember, the whole point of this law is, can the parent take 8 weeks of leave without worrying about the loss of wages to bond with their new child? You should take care to make sure that all of your parents are being treated equitably. The 8-week minimum is what paid family leave requires. If you do something like, yeah, birth mothers get 12 weeks or maybe up to 20 weeks, and then fathers and everybody else just get 2 weeks, that's not really going to cut it. So this is a situation where we probably have to talk to you a little bit about the details of your policy, but you as the employer, regardless, kudos if you have any kind of extra compensation that you pay out, but you will have to still account for the fact that you need to be able to explain this to your employees and how this intersects with the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance to be as safe as possible and not have to worry about paying out extra supplemental compensation. Your internal parental leave policy should meet or exceed our PPLO requirements. Let's go to a different scenario. We get this sometimes about high wage earners. Remember, we said earlier in this webinar that the current scheme right now under paid family leave and the paid parental leave ordinance, the wage replacement, this is really designed to maximize benefits to low and mid-wage earners, not necessarily to high wage earners. So let's look at our intrepid high wage earner. This person is very handsomely compensated, earns $250,000 a year in wages. This person is a covered employee and works for a covered employer. How much of the employee's wages will be replaced by supplemental compensation? And again, the answer is only up to the cap. In 2025, that weekly cap is $2,402. And again, this is the breakdown. Of that $2,482, the state PFL benefit is going to pay out $1,681 weekly, and the employer's supplemental compensation obligation will be $721 per week. When you multiply that out by 8 weeks, that figure is $5,768. There's no question that high wage earners don't get the same benefit out of this as low to mid wage earners. On the other hand, high wage earners have myriad other structural advantages that no minimum wage worker will ever have. So again, for your highest wage earners, you will probably just be safest assuming maximum amount as you see here, $721 per week under the PPLO for supplemental compensation coming from you, the employer. And moving on to another scenario, vacation leave. So we talked a little bit about some changes to the state law. The state law said employees don't have to spend down their vacation anymore before they can actually take paid family leave. Let's see how that intersects with our San Francisco law. It's different than what the PPLO requires. So this employee has 3 weeks of accrued vacation before they start paid family leave. Can the employer use some or all of this vacation bank toward its costs of supplemental compensation? Generally, the answer is yes. Up to 2 weeks vacation with an enormous caveat if the employee agrees. We have a rule that implements and interprets the law, and that's Rule 4. It is posted on our website. The employer needs to be very clear and overly communicative with the employee. The employee has to agree to the use of the vacation. Granted, if the employee doesn't agree, then you as the employer actually don't owe them any supplemental compensation, but this is where our office will spend some time with both the employer and the employee looking over documents and making sure that everything was appropriately communicated and appropriately documented. For some high wage earners, like we talked about before, 2 weeks of their vacation is likely going to exceed the PPLO's requirements. So for some of those situations, we may need to work together on some specifics. You can reach out to our office. But again, this is only about vacation. Sick time can never be used for paying supplemental compensation. And please keep in mind, if the employer intends to use any of the vacation time of the employees toward its obligations for supplemental compensation, you need to notify the employee, and they have to affirmatively agree to that. Last scenario for you all is about new employees. This person started working for you September 1, 2024, and their child was born June 15th, 2025. So remember that wage replacement and job protected leave are different things, right? So regardless of any of these dates here, as soon as the employee told you as the employer, I'm going to become a parent, you should be providing them with the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance form so they can make decisions about how they're going to do things. So protected leave, this means you can take job protected leave for a purpose. Generally comes at 1 year, works out to about 1,250 hours of service. That is under state law, California Family Rights Act. The next question is, when can an employee receive supplemental compensation? So an employee must apply for and be eligible for paid family leave. Again, paid family leave, PPLO supplemental compensation, that's the wage replacement part of it. The job protected leave, that's CFRA, FMLA. The employer can require that the employee be on CFRA or FMLA leave in order to receive paid family leave. The employer can also just agree to do it. The ball is going to be in your court as the employer. And just keep in mind, under this scenario, CFRA, the California Family Rights Act, is likely going to cover this employee effective August 31st, 2025, because at that point they'll have worked for the employer for at least 1 year, and the clock is different for taking paid family leave. Remember, for paid family leave wage replacement, the employee gets to do that within 1 year of the adoption, foster placement, or birth. So what should you do as an employee or an employer if your new employee hasn't worked for you that long? It's actually not that different. You are still going to be giving them the PPLO form. You are still going to be educating them about their rights under the law. You will have to make a decision on whether or not you are going to permit them to take paid family leave before or after they are eligible for CIFRA or FMLA, but if you say yes to them going on paid family leave, you're going to owe them supplemental compensation so long as they've worked for you for at least 6 months. Remember, 6 months is the cutoff date. At that point, the PPLO does start to apply to that person. So keep that in mind. We're going to start talking about a few best practices. We're almost at the end of the webinar now. Those of you who have been diligently putting questions in the chat, I'm sure Bernice and Maura have just as diligently been trying to answer your questions. So let's talk about what some best practices are. So first off, you should be updating your employee handbook or portal or whatever you call it, all about the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance. That will save you so much in the long run. If you have good handbook portal resources, you will really save yourself a lot of headache. Two, everyone should be trained. Supervisors, managers, anybody that is the type of person that winds up getting told, hey, I'm going to need to take time off. I'm going to become a parent. They need to understand what their duties are on the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance, and hopefully many of you on this webinar right now are in that group of people. Three, record keeping is so vital to success in life, and especially with San Francisco labor laws. Keep good records of the PPLO form, the date you provided it to the employee, and the date that it was returned to you from the employee. Again, the PPLO form goes to you, the employer. It does not go to the Office of Labor Standards Enforcement. Please also keep in mind the PPLO form is available in English, Spanish, and Chinese. If you have employees who do not speak those three languages and you need other linguistic assistance, please contact us immediately. 4, communicate appropriately with the employee before, during, and after leave. Bernice, Maura, and I cannot tell you how many times we get calls from employees saying, I am on leave right now. I cannot reach anybody at my employer or at my employer's third-party administrator who is in charge of the leave. If we start calling you because your employee cannot reach you, that is not a good thing. We trust that you will take this advice seriously and change practices if needed. Next, you want to maintain all EDD records and payroll records. This is your obligation under a variety of state laws anyway, and they're especially useful here when you are calculating wage replacement. Next, you want to use the calculation instructions on our website as well as our calculator. This will be really helpful in situations with multiple employers. And again, our analysts spend a good amount of time and energy refining these tools. We want you to use them, and we're always open to feedback on how to improve them. And then, of course, you should pay the employee supplemental compensation on time and in full at the regularly scheduled pay periods whenever possible. And above all else, contact OLSC if you have any questions. And once again, it bears repeating several times. Doing the first few best practices, updating your handbook about the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance and training everybody about their duties will really help you avoid investigations from our office. The employer has the burden to post the poster and provide the PPLO form to the employee and explain clearly to the employee what that form is and that the employee needs to fill it out, apply for paid family leave, and get all of that back to the employer. So really focus on the first 3. The rest of it will come in due time. Finally, just as a reminder of the resources that we currently have on our website, we have an official poster for posting. We are going to do our very best to get the webinar slides and audio presentations up after this. We have Excel calculators. We have written calculation instructions. We have FAQs and rules. And we have documents for employers and employees alike in multiple languages. So once again, our website is www.sf.gov/PPLO. With any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can call our hotline 415-554-4190. You can email us at pplo@sf.gov.org and visit our website. We are happy to help you with the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance. Unfortunately, there are some things that we cannot provide guidance on, except for very broad and vague descriptions. Those things include paid family leave, pregnancy disability leave, the California Family Rights Act, the FMLA, and my personal favorite, tax advice. We cannot give you tax advice. Unfortunately, we're not the state or federal government, but we will try to do everything we can to connect you with the appropriate resources. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share. And it looks like I will now need to chime in and solicit some support from Maura and or Bernice. I think we do have a small amount of time for any live questions or any issues that either one of you want to bring to my attention, since I am not looking at the Q&A. Bernice, if you're talking, you are muted, so I can't hear you.
Thanks. Can you hear me now, Bianca?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining in. I think some of the themes, I've got about 4 more questions to answer, but we got quite a few questions about the taxes, so I appreciate you answering that. The other question, we're getting a lot of calculation questions, like if someone has tips, how do we calculate? And then just if you could explain again that paid family leave benefits come from the state and the PPLO is a requirement for employers.
I'm sorry, the last one I did not understand. Could you repeat or rephrase?
Sure. We're getting questions first about tips, so if you could answer that first, and then I'll go
Yeah.
to the other questions.
Okay, tips. Great. Thank you for the question. So we follow state law, and state law says that tips are not wages, that they are separate. That is some kind of gratuity or financial arrangement between customer and worker, not employer and employee. So when people apply for paid family leave, or when they are applying for supplemental compensation under the PPLO, tips are not included. Only wages are.
Okay, great. And then the next question is, I'm going to try to consolidate. Can you explain what benefits someone receives from the EDD and how that benefit is different than the employer required compensation?
Okay, yes, I believe I can address that question. So the EDD will pay paid family leave to the employee. The employer will pay supplemental compensation to the employee. So the benefit from the state for wage replacement will be 70 to 90% of the average weekly wage up to the cap, and then the employer will pay supplemental compensation directly to the employee for the remaining 10 to 30% of the average weekly wage.
Great. And then another question, it just came up again. We've had it about 6 or 7 times, is what if an employee doesn't want to apply for paid family leave?
That is an interesting question. Generally speaking, the employee needs to be eligible for and receiving paid family leave to be covered by this benefit. Your job as the employer is to make sure that you are appropriately educating the employee about what rights they have under state and or local law. If the employee decides not to go on paid family leave, ultimately, what you need to be able to do is show that, hey, we provided this information to them and they made the decision that they made.
Bianca, we also saw quite a few questions about remote and hybrid workers. So could you review one more time how to determine if someone's a covered employee, if they work remotely, or if they have some sort of hybrid situation?
Sure. So it doesn't matter where the employer is headquartered. The employer could be headquartered on Mars. If this is a private entity, whether for profit or nonprofit, but non-government, if that employer has at least 20 employees anywhere in the world and the employee is working sufficiently in the geographic boundaries of San Francisco, then the law is going to apply to that employer. To the employee, it doesn't matter if the person is working in an office, driving around, at a cafe, at their house, or literally walking around on the street. What matters is where is that work actually happening? And so these fixations on hybrid or remote, you don't need to be concerned about the structure or the vehicle that the employee may be working in. What matters is, are they working in the geographic boundaries of San Francisco at least 8 hours per week for a covered employer, and are at least 40% of their hours being worked in the geographic boundaries of San Francisco. So here's an example. Employee works remotely from home in San Francisco 3 days a week, reports to an office in Sunnyvale, which is in the South Bay area, 2 days a week. Is that person covered by the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance? Generally speaking, yes. If they're working for an employer that's covered by the law, they're working enough hours in San Francisco by working 3 days a week, or in other words, 60% of their time in the geographic boundaries of San Francisco from home.
Thanks, Bianca. I'll kick it back to Bernice, but I don't know if there were any other common themes that have not been addressed.
Oh, I think we've had a good overview of the questions. And as I said in a lot of the responses, if you have very specific questions, the best way to get those answered is to call the 415-554-4190 hotline number. That information's in the slides, or to email us at pplo@sfgov.org.
Okay, great. It sounds like we have concluded the live Q&A. So again, just to repeat for those of you who stuck with us, we will do our best to post everything by next week. This was our first webinar. We have a post-webinar survey that hopefully some of you will be able to take. We greatly appreciate your feedback. We are available to do this sort of webinar more regularly. And again, we're grateful that so many people decided to take an hour and change out of their day to learn more about San Francisco labor laws. So thank you all again, and don't hesitate to reach out with any other questions or concerns. I will go ahead and end the webinar now. Thank you to both Maura and Bernice. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Bianca.